Hey everyone, good morning and welcome to the New Media Show. Of course, my name is Todd Cochran, and we are without Rob first go here. He he texts me, says I'm rebooting my computer and it's not coming up very quickly. So his exact words was crazy, and he just sent me a text said coming. So maybe he finally got it to dial in, but we wanted to get the show started this morning, and of course, I want to welcome our guest today. And it's Dan Sacher from AudioBurst.com. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Good to be here.
Glad to have you on. And you're out on the East Coast. And so we got all coast covered today. Well, when Rob shows up, we'll do. So we'll have the East, West, and West, West truly covered. But Dan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and just give everyone the, kind of, for those that are not familiar with AudioBurst.com, just give them the kind of the quick 411 about the site. And
Sure. So my name is Dan Sacher. I'm head of content partnerships for AudioBurst. And AudioBurst is a relatively young company. We're a couple of years old. Just in the past year, I'd say in the last few months, we've rolled out products that you can actually interact with online and play around with. But what AudioBurst does is it's a technology platform that listens to spoken word content. It transcribes the content automatically, and then an AI layer reads that transcription and segments the audio content into what we call bursts, which are 30-second to 2-minute clips, which are then wrapped in metadata and easily searchable, easily syndicatable. The idea is really to take audio and make it searchable in a way that it hasn't been before, and make it available to other platforms and devices and users that aren't turning on the radio or opening up a podcast app. We feel like there's so much great audio content being created that just doesn't find its way into the ears of people who are eager to hear that content, because a lot of times audio really requires a mindset of, like we said, turning on the radio or opening up a podcast app and being in the mode of wanting to listen to something. So the idea is to free up audio from its current kind of constraints or walled garden environments and make it more accessible to users, to platforms, to applications, to devices. Certainly, all the voice-enabled assistant type of devices are a big piece of this whole puzzle. But it's a pretty impressive technology, I have to say. I started working with AudioBurst about a year ago. And even in that year, you can see how much the AI has improved in its ability to really not just figure out what a piece of content is about, but clip it at the exact in and out point that is appropriate.
So there's no human interaction whatsoever on this thing. So it just goes and does the indexing or clipping, as you say, by itself then.
Yeah, we've obviously a ton of humans who are giving the AI feedback. So we have a lot of people who are presenting back, kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down. This is the right entry point. This is the right exit point. Giving the AI some feedback on how well it did and how good a job it does with the clipping and tagging. But yeah, otherwise, we're listening to 50 radio stations 24/7 and indexing about 100 podcasts a day. And that number may be low, actually. I think we've increased that number lately.
So how does that actually... Here comes Rob.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Yep. Okay.
All right. Awesome.
Hey, Rob, I'm just going to have to tease
you. I know.
Hey, your Windows machine's jacked up, dude.
Yeah, exactly. That's why you moved on from Windows, right? Yeah.
Hey, we just Dan was just giving us the kind of the lowdown on AudioBurst and what they're doing, and he was talking about how they do they're doing about 100 podcasts and like 50 some radio stations right now, 57 radio stations that they're listening to 24/7, and then clipping, and then I guess they're doing transcripts for them too. Is that true, Dan? Is that what the purpose of it is, or mini transcripts?
The transcripts are really there only, the transcription's there so the AI can understand the content and figure out how to properly index it and clip it. It obviously also factors into its searchability. So we take clips and put them into our repository, Google, Bing, Yahoo, the search engine spider that content, and the transcript that we make available to the search engines helps the audio content become surfaceable and show up in search results. But it's not a consumer-facing transcription service. That's not what we do.
Yeah. So I'm assuming then what you guys are doing in that content you're making, that you're indexing and clipping, all that goes back to the source user's site, right? So this is an experience where people come to like my site and they find clips or indexes or stuff that they can share. That's not being indexed and being Google. You're not taking away SEO from the content creators, are you? Or how does that interaction work?
Well, so that's a lot of what I'm doing right now is working with content creators, big and small, big radio conglomerates down to, small podcasters, and getting their content into our system. The way the system works, the only way the AI can actually slice up the content is by listening to it and going through that whole process on our servers.
Yeah, of course.
But those clips, the idea is those clips become highlights and a way for people to sample podcasts and radio and make their way back to the original long form content.
So does the clipping and every stuff go back to the original content creator, or does it sit on audioburst.com where it's indexed by Goodio gaining page rank?
The highlights sit on AudioBurst because that's the only place they can. There's no the audio that we're pulling is coming from an RSS. We're listening to RSS feeds. Certainly, what we want to do is then make those clips available to content creators and use those clips as a way to drive more listenership to the long form, the full length experience.
Yeah, I guess, and Rob, my stance on this. Anything that drives, I get real nervous when, obviously we want our content to be syndicated and shared in the whole form, but I get real nervous when my content would be chopped up and put up on a site somewhere that it's not, especially if it's being indexed textually for Google, that's not pointing back at my site. Maybe that's just me, but I don't know. What do you?
Well, Todd, my understanding is that it's possible to get like a player embed, that kind of stuff. And I think possibly where you're heading with this is it's something similar to what I think you guys did, Todd, with Clamor, right?
Yeah.
Where you kind of built this technology to some degree, or links to it, or some relationship with the actual web players themselves somehow. So there's some way that this can be linked up with the podcaster's kind of overall kind of listening experience, right? And I think some of this stuff is kind of we just don't know yet. I mean, how this is going to play out, and how this content's going to be indexed, and why, honestly, and I think, Dan, if you can talk about this with us too, is why do you guys think that snippets of content is something that's compelling for the listener? And I guess that's one of the challenges, I think, if I look back in time, right, and I look back at many companies that have, and I'm talking about, over the last 2 decades of people and companies launching audio search platforms. And oftentimes they haven't worked because listeners don't necessarily want to search in audio. That's been my observation, and I'm just curious. The AI part is what's really, really intriguing to me, because then you're applying some intelligence behind this, and you're able to maybe do some things that just regular audio search wasn't really all that great at doing. Of combining things together and maybe having a deeper integration with the hosting platforms for this content, helping people kind of discover things. But what's your perspective on, why a listener would get value out of doing this? Is there something that you guys have done research to find, what the rationales, maybe even beyond what sampling might do? And I think that's one of the angles that I got from you when I talked to you was the sampling part, especially as shows do more like pre-roll insertions and things like that, where sampling is a little bit of a challenge. And I think, though I do think that pre-roll ad insertions is kind of something that's going to fade away, but I mean, how important is sampling to your overall strategy of getting listeners to actually adopt and use audio search?
So I guess, a couple things I'd say. One is, I think and this goes back to our conversation, I think audio search tools have failed because it's the whole idea of people wanting to do a search on audio is kind of like as a starting point is a failed idea. What we're trying to do is to bring audio into the mix with text and video and all the other types of content you can search for online. So, it's not so much that people want to search audio; it's that people are interested in hearing the latest on the Trump presidency. There's a ton of audio content being created every day on podcasts and our radio that is very relevant, and sometimes in many ways, even more up to the minute on a story that is constantly changing on an hourly basis, right? So when people are making those searches and looking for content, audio is not factoring into the result set that they're getting. What we're trying to do is kind of even the playing field and bring audio into that same decision set that people might get when they're searching for a topic, and that might be something that's highly topical, that's changing, like I said, minute by minute, or it can be something highly niche oriented that even more so, people are having a hard time finding when it comes to doing kind of a generalized search, because the audio results are not coming up, and your kind of really niche interest podcast is not going to factor into those results. So I think that's one thing. I mean, the other thing in terms, I'd say specific in terms of when you talk about snippets and highlights, and a little bit to Todd's point, I think people who are fans of New Media Show know the show and are going to come to the full show. I don't think a snippet version is going to be satisfying to them. There are a ton of people who do not know the show and will not find out about the show, are not going to make the plunge to listen to an hour-long podcast. But I think the ability to sample and listen to snippets, or by happenstance come across a specific topic that you guys are discussing on this show that coincides with their interests, suddenly presents a new opportunity to bring a new fan in, right? You discuss a topic. Our AI, our smart agent, is what it's basically trying to do is find people's interests and the content that's being created and match them up together. So, if we do this right, we're finding people who aren't current listeners to your show, aren't current fans, but are kind of late or out there who should be and just aren't familiar with your content. And again, I think the format of radio and podcasting makes it difficult to kind of, you have to really jump in on the deep end. There's no kind of dipping your toe in. There's no wading in through the shallow end. You kind of have to be in it or not in it. And I think technology is going to bridge that gap in some way. I think AudioBurst is the solution that will make that happen. But if it's not AudioBurst, something else will come along, because this is the truth is there's just too much great audio content being created and not enough of a means for people who have similar interests to what's being talked about to match up.
Okay. Yeah, Todd, I was thinking about this too. I think what we're getting into is kind of an area of psychology of the listener and what drives the listener to listen to any of our shows. And I think we've been out there saying for many years that this is a word of mouth sharing medium, right?
Yeah.
But as you think about what he just said, and you think about what the potential is of maybe people discovering our show based on topics and based on some, a compatibility of interest. There probably is something there that may help take the medium beyond just what the word of mouth sharing is like your friend telling you that go check out this podcast because it talks about, an area that you have an interest in. Maybe we do show up in the search results as talking about a topic that's relevant to a particular person, but then I guess it isn't so much audio search at that point. It's more linked up with keyword search, right? Which is what everybody does. And I also saw something on LinkedIn. Gary Vaynerchuk was talking about how these smart speaker platforms are going to become, or already are starting to become, the new search engine, right? So I guess audio is going to maybe take front and center here as a pathway to discover all forms of kinds of content. So maybe he's onto something here, Todd. I don't know.
I hope so.
Having tested every single, and I'm just generalizing here. Having tested having tested every automated system that translates audio automatically, it's really bad. It's got like less than maybe 60-70% accuracy rate. So how do you guys deal with that? Because if this is doing this automatically, the actual being able to get the correct transcription for the software to make these decisions and where it's going to clip is critical. If it doesn't get the audio transcript right, it's going to be, junk out to, junk in, junk out, I guess is the better word. But how are you guys dealing with that?
So, yeah, our accuracy rate, I'd put more in the 85 to 90% range.
That's pretty good.
The truth is, the AI doesn't need 100%. It's not looking at it the way a person does, right? So it's trying to get the gist of things, and it has a couple. It's thinking of it, in a kind of when you go back to this kind of neural network kind of mindset. It's not just looking at the text. So it's looking at the text. It's seeing certain terms, and based on its knowledge of what's going on in the world and its knowledge of spidering the internet at large, it can take certain topics and realize and kind of correct the transcription essentially and say, okay, well, actually this name, this is Dan Sacher, Sacher, not Dan Sacher, Sachar, because he's talking about AudioBurst, and I know based on the Dan Sachers out in the world that he works with AudioBurst. So the AI is smarter than the transcription itself. So what it's really looking to do is figure out proper names and certain terms and create and reference them against word clouds that it has in its system. So it knows that, if you're talking about LeBron James, you're likely to see the word Cleveland Cavaliers around it. You're likely to see a whole bunch of other terms that go with it. But then if LeBron James gets into a Twitter feud with Donald Trump, it will know that too. So it'll observe the fact that that's happening online and add those terms to the word cloud associated with LeBron James. So now it has a full context around what any story about LeBron James might be about, and will do a much better job of clipping the in and out point. That's the advantage of what an AI brings to the table. It's not just reading a transcription, but it's actually bringing context.
Yeah, being a bit of a geek, anytime I hear AI at this point, I'm saying it's assisted information because it's all code. But yeah, okay, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
The one other thing I will say, back to your point in terms of this being a word of mouth medium, I think the reality is that there's so much content out there today on, audio, video, text, etc., that these smart agents and these virtual assistants that are coming into the home and becoming, part of your cell phone and eventually going to be in your car radio systems, these agents are going to become your friend. These are your word of mouth ambassadors who are kind of scraping everything that's going on in the world and looking at what your friends are listening to, looking at subjects you're interested in, and they're the ones that are going to be starting to recommend you different things to listen to, read, watch. That's ultimately, just given how much content is being created, and we're in this kind of many-to-many dialogue when it comes to media now, the only way to sort through it is to have, what was, let's say, a person who might be able to sort through it all for you now in the next few years, we're going to have smart machines and virtual assistants and these Alexa type devices that are going to bring back content to you. And that, again, is where all this tagging and clipping is really critical, because that's the only way that as an end user, I can get a sense of whether this is a right match for me, and then give feedback to that personal assistant and say, oh yeah, this is perfect. I want more of this sort of stuff, or don't ever send me something from this source because I don't like them. It's not my, they're not the type of news I like to listen to.
So from the technology side, I think I'm kind of understanding what you're doing here. So the question then is on the user side. So you have, I'm assuming, an app. Someone loads an app. They're using AudioBurst. They set up their account. What do? Do they set up a profile? Do they say what they like, what they dislike? What's the end user? What do they do?
So AudioBurst is actually not a consumer-facing company. We sit between. Yeah, we sit between the content creators and all the different types of platforms and devices and apps that are out there in the marketplace. So we're currently we actually just announced a funding round with Samsung. Samsung is going to enable their smart TVs and their assistant platform with AudioBurst. So they're going to be drawing on this repository short form content that we're creating. Similarly, we're set up with a few different mobile apps right now. We're talking to a number of car companies. So we're essentially the repository that enables a lot of platforms to pull great content from audio publishers, depending on specific interests. So that might be you walk into into a house that you're renting and in a new city, and an app pings you with a number of results on local stories, things to do, museums to go visit, reviews of theaters and restaurants. You might be in a stock trading app, and you get pinged with a number of audio results for companies that you're watching in your watch tab. You might be out for a jog, and there's certain things you like to listen to on a jog that you've specified to your app, saying, I want to hear, I'd like to listen to stories about science when I'm out on my jog. And so these are all different specific use cases where third-party providers can reach into our repository and pull out, based on the amount of content we have there and what's tagged in there, present that back to users who are looking for a specific type of content for a specific situation they're in.
So the partners then are going to be using their profile information that they have on the user of their app to be able to make these recommendations. That, to me, is, in this day and age with everything that's been going on, it's a little weird. Because all of a sudden I'm using an app and it suggests to me, I don't know, Rob, what do you feel about that?
Well, Todd, I think, one of the things that's been going on here is and I think this is a much bigger discussion, but I think this whole recent issues with Facebook and privacy and all this stuff, I think have just most recently here over the last week or so really heightened this concern around user data privacy. And I think it's an important topic as we move into this new phase of computing and new phase of how we as users of technology connect with the internet and connect with devices. And I think Dan is really, really part of that next revolution or evolution of how we as human beings connect and utilize technology in our lives. I mean, I know that the recent reorganization of Microsoft is kind of pointing towards an AI future, augmented reality. So I see that these technologies, and podcasting is going to ride along with this, and these technologies are going to collide with the privacy concerns. And I think we're coming into a time where we as users need to decide whether or not we want the benefits of this and are willing to give up some of our privacy, and if we're not willing to give up some of our privacy, then we're not going to get the benefits of this. And I think that's and all of these visions for the future, and AI technology is not going to see its potential. So we as a society and human beings need to decide what we want. If we want privacy, then we're probably not going to see that future unfold the way it could. That uses smart agents that know more about us than we know about ourselves at times.
Well,
and I think we are coming into the freaky zone, right? But I think we've already been there.
Well, we've been there a long time, and
and I think a lot of people just didn't realize it.
Well, I've always said,
I think people did realize. I think people understand that you are, like you said, you're giving up a certain amount of information in order to get back a specific benefit. What happened with Facebook is very different. Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica issue is more about, first of all, people were taking quizzes, personality quizzes. They weren't, this was, essentially an unrelated, kind of entertainment. Let's say you're taking a little quiz. That information was getting scraped. And then not only was your information getting scraped, but then it was then taking your friends' information and scraping them. I think that's a very different idea, because you're giving up essential information under false pretenses.
Well, if you look,
I think that's the real challenge. I think if you're talking about the benefit from our perspective, we need to make it clear by telling us, when we play a clip from station provider X and you say, I didn't like that, we're going to assume that means that we'll make certain assumptions. If you say 3 times that you don't like that provider, we probably don't, that you don't like that provider. If we then take that information, sell that on to an advertiser, that to me is where the breach happens. I think as long as we're very clear about what information you give up to us in exchange for what benefit, as you say, then people can make that decision. Facebook thing, to me, what was really kind of insidious about it is that you gave up information, seemingly in a harmless environment, and it went, and not only did it, capture your information, but then took a bunch of your friends' information too.
What I find kind of ironic, and I don't want to get into the weeds too deep on this, is, but we're now being told, or at least there was public information that we didn't even know about, that back in 2008, Facebook was just giving all this data. I mean, just they gave a whole political group all their data. So there was no outrage then. So that's why I kind of say it's kind of fake outrage now, because people are all freaking out and like, well, it's been going on for at least 10 years and you just didn't know it. One of the or didn't pay attention to it. One of the folks in the chat room says it's a lot like Clamor, but Rick, it's really not, because Clamor, you picked the spot that you wanted to share. This, you don't do nothing. The AI, quote unquote, does the picking of the spot and shares it. And again, it doesn't. And the way they're doing it now is you have to have some integration with a company like ours, or with Rob's, to actually then have the suggestion engine popping for the users that are listening to content or in your system.
Let's talk a bit about Clamor, because I think Clamor is a really, really good example of why what Dan and the AudioBurst folks is doing is really interesting. It's different. That was one of the big reasons that Clamor didn't make it and didn't scale, was the fact that it was too dependent on the user doing the heavy lifting of clipping, right?
Yeah.
And it was clumsy and it was difficult. But what AudioBurst is doing is they're doing it for the user, right? And that was the piece that was missing from Clamor, is that it needed to be done by an artificial agent that could scale, that could actually do it on scale. And I think that the back end connection, like with a platform like ours, Todd, with what AudioBurst is doing, might be an interesting kind of connection for us to offer better discovery of the content in search results. I guess one of the questions, I guess, Dan, I think both Todd and I have for you too, and this will bring some clarity, I think, to all of the podcasters who are listening to this too, is how you see that connection with platforms, whether it be listening platforms or hosting platforms, with your technology.
In what sense? What the connection? In what sense?
I guess, I mean, the content creators live and create within these platforms, like from Spreaker or Pod, PowerPress or Blueberry or whatever, and they're publishing into those engines, right? And they're going out to all these other listening platforms. And then there's the listening apps out there, the Stitchers and the and Spreaker has listening apps too. So how does that integration happen? Are you guys looking to integrate in with more just the listening side, or are you looking to integrate in with the publishing side as well?
Well, definitely with the listening side. I mean, I think there's there's a clear gap, I think, in all of the apps in terms of the ability to do keyword searching and being able to uncover episode level content. And searching obviously is the kind of the active side of it. The passive side is actually even more interesting. Is I finished listening to an episode of Radiolab that's about the CRISPR gene mutation or technology. Here are a number of other podcasts whose episodes focus on that same thing. So you're getting a kind of horizontal matching up of content. That to me is very exciting in terms of the podcast apps, and a personal frustration of mine when I'm listening to content is that it's the apps are not they're not able to dig deep enough into episode specific content to then make cross inferences between them. So I think that's certainly a in terms of where we and again when you talk about sampling and short form content, another great opportunity to at the end of a podcast be able to say, okay, well, here's 5 clips from other podcasts that are of similar topic, check them out, and then link through to listen to the entire thing if you're interested. So that's certainly one area on the listening side. But again, I think for us, I don't. There's a lot of companies that have come along and said we're going to disrupt the whole way people listen to podcasts or disrupt radio. That's not, I think people who listen to podcasts generally have a pretty good idea of how to find them and follow them. I don't think that's where the gap is. The gap is the 60% of the population that's not listening to podcasts or that is migrated away from radio, and getting them and giving them other opportunities to find great content outside of the specific kind of turning on the dial or firing up their podcast app.
Yeah, I think that does play into our contention that there really isn't a podcast discovery problem per se, not under I think many's specific definition, but there is this part that, like you say, where there's still half the population that still doesn't regularly listen to podcasts. It's actually probably even more than that. That are still listening to radio. So I think working with radio to transition people over to on-demand consumption, I think is definitely part of the strategy that will push the podcasting medium forward and reach more people. And if there's a way to do that, there might be something that might help grow the medium a little faster.
Yeah, great. We think there's a lot more potential for growth with the non-listeners than trying to kind of, I think, and a lot of podcasters have found that, amongst the listening population, the growth has been, like you said, 2 to 4% per year. It's incremental, but it's not, there's a much bigger pie to be had from growing the number of listeners than trying to get the fans to listen more.
I think, though, the challenge you run into then is, let's say, for example, you do a deal with ABC. ABC's not going to want their listeners to be wandering off to another network. They're going to want to have ABC shows being recommended only. So I think you still end up in these silos. I know that if I was going to be implementing this on, I would not want competing shows to be anywhere in the system that would drive their earballs away from my property. So from a business perspective, I think it's cool on from a business owner standpoint, I think it's cool from the ability to do inter network promotion, but are you guys seeing some of that resistance to having for example, you have a network A and some network B stuff is suggested in the network A app? Does that go contrary to the goal of keeping people on property? So I don't know. Have you seen those objections before? Or?
Sure, of course. People want to own, feel very protective of their listeners. They want to protect, that's certainly, and it's valid. That's a valid concern, but it is honestly kind of it's a very kind of linear mindset, right? Where it's kind of, where people tune into a certain station on the dial and you try to keep them on that station. We're heading into a much more on-demand driven universe with audio. So
I fully
you can resist it, but the truth is, it's the same thing that Google encountered in the 90s. Is they started indexing content. People were saying, "Oh, you can't put my content onto your search results," and they said, "Take me out of your search results." Of course, 2-3 years later, they all came back and said, "Okay, you're a great way of referring traffic onto us. We want to be in. We'll accept that you're going to mix in an ABC news story with a CBS news story because that's going to be the way that people are going to find their way to content." And that's the truth. Is, again, there's so much content out there, and there's so many choices out there that these filtering technologies are the only way that people are going to be able to really truly find their way to your content. It's tempting to want to kind of dig in and kind of put your arms around what you own, but that never really works once a digital technology comes into play.
But at the same point, let's be fair. If I'm integrating this into my app, there's no way I'm going to allow I don't know, Rob, where do you sit on that? Because
sure, no, that's fine. That's your app. You own that app.
Yeah. So like,
but again, your app is really speaking to fans that you've acquired. What we want to do is find fans who are not familiar with your content.
I understand that, but if you have a bunch of vertical providers that are protecting their content, it's not gonna. You have to. So it being that you guys don't have an app itself, to me, you guys are the ones that, if you had an app, can democratize this, but you guys don't have an app, so you work in between with providers. So
Todd, they should be able to narrow those results down to an aggregation of content, I would think. I think it's technically possible to do that.
Yeah.
But I think that the bigger use case here is in larger aggregation apps that are aggregating large amounts of content, and I think those are typically the bigger players in the space that are doing that. Now, granted, smaller apps are going to be aggregating. It's just like, Blueberry is a good example. You're aggregating all the podcasts in the medium right now. So, you're a prime candidate for this kind of capability as well. But I guess, as we think about the smart agent technology, I guess, my brain keeps coming back to this question. Well, what's the actual user experience on like the Amazon, smart agent technology? Is this going to be funneled through what's called, the whole news brief concept? And are you guys ultimately, I think, on these smart agent technologies, going to create a new version of all this content that comes up in a search result? So is it possible what you guys are creating here is the ability to look for a topic and it would play almost like a snippet playlist? Is that what we're talking about here?
Exactly that. Yep.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit specifically about what that user experience could look like as a user. Now, would this be linked up with a specific skill, or would it be kind of global on the Alexa platform? What's your thoughts on that? Or, the simplicity and access.
So AudioBurst has a skill that you can enable. We also, you can go to audioburst.com. You go to search.audioburst.com and you can see what, where the AI is using a lot of content to train itself on how to segment content. You can kind of play around with that. There's the app that we've created is again, or the skill that we've created is not really the driving force behind our business model. would we like Amazon to reference our repository to bring back search results on current events? Absolutely. And that's and I think the truth is, I think all of the virtual assistants, have a gap there. They lack in the ability to bring back a result. If you search for Donald Trump, it'll give you his birth date and it'll give you some biographical information. It won't give you the most recent news about where he is and what he's done. And I think that's something that I think as those platforms mature and as more people use them as places to get current events. As a good example, we're working with someone right now on we have a weather skill. So when you ask Alexa what the weather is, it'll give you an Alexa voice, that kind of the spoken version of the weather. Our skill, if you ask it for the weather, it will bring you back a clip from the radio within the last 2 to 5 minutes with the most recent human-spoken weather update from a meteorologist. The difference between the two experiences is it's night and day. You'll once you experience the human person giving you the weather forecast, you're never going to go back to the Alexa version, and you'll remember the syntax that you have that's required of it. So, I think that's as those platforms mature, you're going to see more of that. I've seen same thing within your car, right? 50% of radio is consumed in the car. All the car companies in the next 2 to 4 years are going to have virtual assistants in the car. So that's where having an kind of essentially impartial aggregator of this content becomes important, because you can either say, okay, I want all my news updates to come from my local radio station or from NPR or from Fox News, or you can say, I want it to come, or the platform itself can say, okay, well, we're going to pull from, in the same way that Google does, we're going to do a generalized search and bring back a number of different results. And over time, as we get to know the kind of things that you like to click on and listen to, then we'll start adapting results that are personalized to your preferences. But that's certainly, I think that's again where all these virtual assistants are going to move in that direction, because there's a lot of great content out there. If we have the technology can match people up with the kind of content they want to hear, you'd much rather hear a very topical, human-spoken audio results versus the Alexa voice giving you kind of a stale, potentially old generic version of the answer you're looking for.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what Amazon does with the smart agent technology, if they utilize their own A9 search technology that they bought many years ago, or if they're going to sell access to, let's say, a Google or a Bing or something like that to actually drive that Alexa search aspect. Because you're exactly right. I mean, Alexa doesn't do a very good job of search right now, but you can totally see where it needs to, right?
Yeah, so let's we're triggering people's devices, so let's try to prevent using the word the Amazon device versus it's.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah, we call her.
It was really tempting. It was
tempting.
It's when we refer to her as Annie.
Yeah, it's hard because we all you don't refer to it as the Amazon device, you refer to the Alexa device, so it's funny how the personality becomes the product.
Yes.
I know that I've been a little bit of playing a little devil's advocate here this morning, and I just want to make you aware that part of it is because I've seen a lot of this before, and I'm all about helping podcast discovery, but I'm just worried that until you guys get a wider, get to some folks that are like having your own skill, and Alexa, that's good. That allows the democratization of content that you're indexing. So basically anything can be cross-referenced. I think that's good. But I even look at the limitations we have. Like Rob said, we have a directory with over 500,000 podcasts in, and I have an Amazon skill as well. But there's a limitation to that because of the way Amazon, the way their system works. I cannot have, I have to limit the shows that our skill works with to those that we host, because I can't be guaranteed that every show is going to have an HTTPS media URL that Amazon requires of us. And if the show doesn't have that, and we allow it to be indexed, and we tell the skill to play the specific podcast, and it doesn't play, well, it makes it for a bad experience because of the limitations within the platform. So I think that will hamper, well, not for us, but again, if you have someone that has a big network, Rob, you guys don't have that problem because, well, you do, because you guys do some syndication as well. So the shows that you guys syndicate technically can't be on your Alexa skill, because you don't, unless you pull that media in and reserve it, which I don't think you are. You're in a limitization too, so still within your own ecosystem, but still within your own ecosystem, there's lots of content that could be recommended across the platform.
Well, there's a lot of shows that are still self-hosted that are not on HTTPS
right.
Links. So it's probably a good third of the podcast space is still self-hosted today.
And they cannot be on these devices, well, and that's the reason why we had to limit it. We had to limit who we, and it's not, if I could have all 500,000 shows on the Amazon skill, I'm like, whoo, but but just because the shows are HTTP, I can't. But I know that all the shows that are hosted at Blueberry are HTTPS, so I don't have to worry about the users having a bad experience.
But Todd, I'm trying to put my kind of forward-looking hat on for this show as I think about what the AudioBurst folks do and what's potential here.
Yeah.
And I guess there's so many questions that I have about what's going to happen with these smart agent platforms and the direction that it could go. And this whole thought that those will become our search platforms. And as you look at computing into the future, we may not be carrying around little handheld devices. I think that may be a controversial statement, but there's going to be there's something different coming. This cloud-based profiles, cloud-based access that travels with us, that knows we're in the car, that knows we're in different locations, and we can get access to any screen. Or our screen is in our eyes somehow, or in our glasses. So we don't, these are new ways of thinking about how we're going to interface with the internet and the web and data that is contrary to how we think of it today. And and it feels like it needs to be more audio. And I think this is where we get into this area of what AudioBurst is doing, is maybe that fits into the model in the future, Todd. I don't know how soon that's coming, but
so the concern though, Rob, on that is okay. So right now, when you open up your browser, you can go anywhere on the web. You can see anything, good and bad, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have I don't know for how long that'll be, but But if you have a smart agent, they're not, don't worry. The web's not going to be taken down by any one government. If you have a smart agent, then you're really, it scares me a little bit, because your media then is controlled by the entity that has enabled that, and you don't have, you're going to have to go.
Who controls the entity, right?
Right, and who controls the content that's being indexed and everything else. So, I think. Here's a question for Dan on, you guys are currently, you said you're indexing 100 shows, 100 podcasts, and you're working with 57 radio stations. How do you scale this to support, 25,000 shows at Libsyn, 15,000 shows at Podbean, 12 to 15,000 shows at Spreaker and Blueberry, and how do you scale that, and is the cost, because we're still dealing with content creators that are largely doing, like, here, I'm in a 10 by 12 room. They don't have big staffs, they don't have big budgets. So how do we make, because this is not going to be cheap to do all this indexing. takes a certain amount of computer processing power to do that, and databases, and you guys get to keep the lights on. So, how do you scale this to include an entire ecosystem?
So the scaling is, it's just a matter, like you said, it's more storage, it's more, some more processing. We have a certain number of inputs right now, and that we can listen to concurrently. There's the scaling process is compared to the engineering work and the know-how of building the AI brain and the engine. That is the expensive part. Obviously, adding another server to handle 10 more podcasts an hour is not going to be where the scaling issue really becomes a problem for us. I think the question is more, how do you take all those results and make sense of them? I think that's the biggest challenge, right? Is being able to index them and then provide the right data around that content to match it up with the user. The scaling issue is with audio. It's certainly a lot. A big reason why we're in the audio business and not videos, because the storage and processing requirements are much smaller and much easier to scale.
If I change and put my business hat on, and let's say I wanted to come over and work with you guys and have our 11,000 shows indexed, the thing that we're going to be looking at is cost/reward. And if I'm going to step up and write that check to index 11,000 shows and come up with those snippets, again, Rob, it goes back to, I'm writing a big check, then do I want cross promotion of other networks? Probably not. So again,
our model is not to charge the creators for the indexing of the content.
But you're going to have someone's got to pay for. What's the model then?
So ultimately, what we want to do is distribute those those bursts out from podcast and radio to all those different potential third-party platforms.
Right.
And let's say when you step into your car and ask the radio to play you a personalized half an hour of radio, there'll be ads that get inserted in every several bursts. That ad revenue gets split between the distribution platform, us, the distributor / technology enabler, and the content creator. So, the idea is not to charge the creators or, in fact, the distributors, but to do a rev share on advertising that gets divvied up amongst different parties. Again, this goes back to some of the privacy issues we talked about before, but our ability to match up advertisers with listeners is much more enhanced because we're getting a much clearer, idea of what kind of preferences the audience wants. So you're able to not just stick the same Squarespace ad in front of every single podcast or every single clip, but actually tailor it to the specific audience member who's listened to those clips, those bursts.
Yeah, so it's definitely demands a higher premium on the advertising because you're reaching the exact person when you have the right advertiser.
Yeah.
So are you guys factoring in, if you're looking at that, then that begs a whole bunch of other questions, which would be around duration of content, duration of ads, placement of the ads, and I'm sure the use of dynamic ad insertion. And who actually would be providing that? Is that something that you guys would be open to other platforms being able to tie into that, or are you guys looking to build your own platform? Okay.
Well, the kind of ad op system and the operations, the actual feeding of the ads would come through our system, but we certainly will, and we're not at the point where we're monetizing any of this stuff yet, but certainly giving the content owners a crack at that inventory. So giving, the idea again is about growing the pie and providing new opportunities to find listeners and to match up with advertisers. These are incremental opportunities for monetization of your content. So we certainly we're building as an open platform that publishers can traffic ads to and be part of that monetization process. Or depending on who you are, if you're in a 10 by 12 room and your main thing is just making your podcast, then we can syndicate out your content and find you advertisers and bring you incremental revenue without you having to really do anything. You don't have to write a check. You don't have to implement a line of code. The content gets listened to through the AI. It gets fed to the right ears according to our smart agent technology and gets matched up with the right advertiser, and the check comes back to the person who's in that 10 by 12 room making their content every day.
I think that's key, because so much of this is going on right now is the creators are kind of being cut out. The content's being used, and they're sending, and I'm not saying you guys are doing this, but it's good to know that this is your thought process, because there are some platforms where the podcaster gets nothing if advertising is run against the content, and they get the right to be on the platform, which is nice, but monetization on the platform doesn't come back to them at all. So
no, I think that's critical for us. It's like,
yeah,
this technology has to be used in a way that brings more listeners and more advertisers and more dollars back to the creators, because that's kind of the lifeblood of this kind of system. Is that, again, that many-to-many ecosystem where you have a lot of people creating content that around a myriad of topics, and where the technology comes in is that ability to match up users and content. So if the content owners are not seeing the benefit, then obviously a key part of that equation is missing. If there's not incentive and motivation for creators to create great content that we can find the right listener for.
So I guess that begs the next question, which would be the analytics behind that, and how that's going to be handled, where the content that's being delivered is being hosted, and there's like you look at our platform with Spreaker and Todd's, we're hosting platforms. We provide the core analytics for content providers. If you guys are capturing snippets of that content, I guess the leading question here is, where does the analytics go, and how accessible to the content provider would analytics be around listens and those kind of things? And is it possible that could be reported back via API back to the source platforms to be added to the metrics that's displayed to the content user? And this is not to jump on you guys specifically, but this is an issue today with, like, Spotify, for one thing. There's no data coming back on consumption of the content right now that's coming. But I guess that's kind of an issue that I don't want to see grow and become a much bigger issue, where all these redistribution platforms are keeping separate metrics on consumption. That makes it more difficult for content providers to aggregate traffic and to aggregate their numbers. So if you could talk a little bit about that too, that might be helpful.
And just to add before you get started, it's also when podcasters see traction on platforms, when they see that their content is being, even if it's a snippet is being listened to, and they say, I had 182 snippet listens on AudioBurst through their ecosystem, that is going to be like, the podcasters going to be like, oh man, that they're going to start. It's a self-serving cycle, because they will promote.
Yeah, no, the analytics are a big part of what we're building out. So there's an entire publisher platform that content creators can access that does a bunch of things. First of all, analytics, not only just for the content, not for your clips and bursts, but across the ecosystem. So you can get a sense of what sorts of content are doing well within specific categories, what keywords are performing well, how they match up against trending topics in general. I think that's all very important stuff for creators to get a sense of, right? Is to say, okay, this is the stuff that's doing really well. I'm thinking of, expanding, kind of going off or doing, let's say, like a a few episodes on this topic. How, what sorts of issues around these topics are in demand. That whole set of analytics are going to be available through this publisher platform. The first thing we're building out before we get to for surfacing those analytics is is all the foundational elements. So from the metadata about description of your podcast to even then going in and saying, looking at bursts and saying, and removing, adding, editing, to your point of the earlier about some of these tools and the audio editing tools. We have a beta platform we're working on now that allows people to go in, look at the clips that the AI has put into the repository, and be able to make some slight edits to expand or contract, change the in and out point slightly, add certain keywords that may have been overlooked. That's that whole kind of self-service tool we'll be rolling out in the next couple months. Again, it's the sort of thing that if you have the bandwidth and the time to go in there and play around with it, it's fully available to you. There's obviously sharing tools that are also part of the whole process, so you can share them on social networks. You can download the clips and use them as you see fit. All of that whole publisher portal is a really important part of what I've been doing in terms of working with content creators and getting a sense of what sort of tools they would like to see in something like this. And analytics was, consistently mentioned across the board. I think that's one of the bigger problems right now in audio is people don't really get a good sense of what's getting listened to. Apple just recently rolled out some enhanced analytics for their podcasting app, but creators have really been starved of data in terms of what's succeeding and what's working in their podcasts. And I've heard that consistently across the board. So, a big part of what I'm doing is working with content creators and publishers to figure out what sort of tools they'd like from a publisher platform that we would build.
One question I wanted to ask, and I was just thinking about this. Apple just acquired an audio search company not too long ago, and I just wonder if you guys are anticipating some competition coming on this from these bigger tech companies. Could you talk about that a little bit? And is this kind of like an underground thing that's happening that maybe a lot of people in the audio business don't really know, that surfacing AI is something that's going to become really, really big and important to a lot of these bigger tech companies?
For sure. I don't know that AudioSearch, the company that Apple acquired, my understanding of their technologies, it's not automated, so it's not able to index, the full, whatever it is, 500,000 podcasts that are, I guess it's 500,000 total, but about 300,000 active podcasts right now. Mm-hmm. That kind of scale requires technology, right? It requires AI. There's no way you can do that. There's no human version of that can listen to every podcast and tag it consistently and clip it consistently. I think, sure, I would imagine that Amazon or Google would, or Apple or, Spotify, they would all, technology like this is certainly, would be a benefit to all of them. I will say, AudioBurst is about 3 years old now. It takes a while to spin up this kind of skill. It takes a lot of inputs. The AI, the place that our AI has gotten to it's gone through millions and millions of minutes of audio and tons of feedback from humans, giving it cues as to what it's doing right, what it's doing wrong. This is not like a you can't wave a magic wand and make this sort of thing happen. It takes a lot of know-how and just a lot of time ultimately, because you're building a brain essentially. You're building a neural network that takes that has basically has to learn about every topic under the sun, because when you look at radio and podcasts, every kind of topic is being discussed. So I think I don't know exactly what's going on at those companies and what they're doing and where their heads are at on this sort of thing, but like I said earlier, there in 5 years, a technology like AudioBurst or AudioBurst itself will have solved this problem, because right now there's too much content being created that is not feeding itself to the right listeners. So this is really a problem that technology is eventually going to fill the gap to solve. And I think we have a really good head start on solving the problem. But we'll see what happens in the next few years. But I can say with confidence that this whole transition to an on-demand short form ability to kind of search and not just search, but both the push and the pull version of finding and receiving audio is someone is going to figure out how to bridge that gap. And I'm betting on AudioBurst, but we'll see who wins.
What is the typical length of a clip?
Typical length, it's fully determined, by us, but we think the ideal, I would say personally, I'd say the ideal clip is 90 seconds. I think in general, when I've listened to a lot of bursts in the last year, I think it'll vary. I think when you're listening to an episode of Fresh Air, you might have a question answer sequence that might be 2 to 3 minutes. But 90 seconds usually is kind of the sweet spot in terms of being able to, in conversations in radio, a thought usually spans about 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, and that is usually enough to give you a good sense of whether it's something you're interested in, whether you want to listen more to, whether it answers your question or piques your interest enough to want to kind of continue on.
So are you currently now mostly working with networks, or are you working with independent content creators as well at this point?
Everyone across the board. So obviously, if you go to audioburst.com, a lot of folks have just found us through AudioBurst and pinged us at info@audioburst.com. And
sure.
We've certainly a lot of the independent folks have found our way to us through that means. We're also working with a lot of big, medium, small publishers. So everything from for iHeart to public radio to some of the smaller upstart podcast networks. I think the really interesting area for us is folks like you guys, like Blueberry, and like Spreaker and Vox Nest, where you have people who are passionate about a very specific subject, and again, matching them up with their ideal listeners, the people who aren't necessarily finding them because there's so much podcast content out there today. Giving those podcasters the ability to find new audiences. That to me is, I think there's a different set of challenges when you're talking to big media companies and some of their needs in the space. But I think the long tail, I think, is what really makes these technologies really interesting.
So if you're a podcaster, and we have many listening to this, how can they get connected up with you and get their content into your platform and start taking advantage of the various transcription and audio embeds, those kind of things? What's that process today, and what is it going to look like here over the next few months?
The process is really, getting in touch with me, getting in touch with us. You can email info@audioburst.com or me. I'm Dan at audioburst.com. And like I said, the process is pretty simple from the content creators end. It's not, there's no complex code to implement. We do have a whole library of APIs that if you want to implement, we have an embeddable player. If you want to do all that stuff is available to content creators, again, free of charge. That's what we, that's part of our model. But that's up to individuals if they want to take advantage of, if they have the technical capabilities and the interest. There are a number of really powerful tools that we've built through our API engines. But otherwise, there's just kind of the self-service, kind of licensing the content and really not having to do anything more than just license the content and see kind of where it ends up in terms of finding its way to different listeners through our platform.
Well, I'll say this: on the technical level, you need to make it as easy as possible for the content creators, because they're creators. They're not techies. I'm just trying to think how.
And the easiest thing to do is you go to audioburst.com. You can go to that link that you showed on screen just now. You can sign up to be part of within 30 seconds. You can sign up to be part of the AudioBurst ecosystem. So there's no there's really, if you could fill out a form in 30 seconds to do so, you're in. So,
but I think a lot of folks are going to want to.
If you want to be more involved, if you want to implement search on your site, I'm really interested also in working with a lot of folks who are doing editorial and audio. So kind of bridging that gap. So if you're writing editorial and making podcasts, right now there's not a lot of back and forth between them. I would love to work. I'm working with a few folks who are looking to take their audio and insert it into their editorial, so that there's much more of an interplay. When people are finding their articles, they're able to then transition to listen to podcast content. And that's all, again, very kind of off the shelf, pretty basic, for someone who knows a basic level of coding, very easy to do through our APIs.
Yeah, it's actually as easy. I mean, I signed up at AudioBurst, and I started to get all this transcriptions, and really all I had to do was create an account and then just cut and paste my RSS feed, just like any podcaster does to get into any platform, and it starts indexing your episodes, and it sends you emails with links to, well, it's finished this episode. Like just this past week, I did my Speaker Live show, and I had the transcript and the link to get access to all of the embeds of the snippets and stuff within, I don't know, a couple of hours of me publishing my episode. So it seems to happen pretty fast, and it's automatic. So it's pretty easy to work with from what I've seen so far.
How'd you find the transcription itself?
I thought it was really, really good. I'm still a little bit puzzled on exactly how I'm going to use the transcription. So that's the piece that I still haven't worked out yet. But I really like the fact that you've taken you basically display on your website little web players, right, that will play those snippets, right, and those snippets are titled. They're, like you said, they're relatively short. Some are a couple of minutes long. Some are shorter than that. Depends on what that topic is. So you've already generated a title for those as well. I was just curious, is that title, can you edit that? I don't know that I remember whether or not you can edit the title of the snippets or not.
So it's the title's editable. The tags are editable, so you can add or subtract from them. There's a thumbnail that you can add or add or replace. All that stuff is editable. We categorize the content into generalized categories like news, technology, sports, business, entertainment. You can change the category if it miscategorized it. And again, the version that you're probably looking at is what I'd call kind of pre-beta. What we're working on now is a much more sophisticated platform for publishers to be able to go in there and make those changes, look at analytics, do all the kind of social sharing. It's a pretty powerful platform, actually. When you're talking to independent podcasters who don't have a lot of time or maybe even technological know-how, it's a very simple system, and it does a lot of the work for you, which is nice.
So I had signed up last week for both New Media Show and for Geek News Central. So I've been getting transcriptions as well. And the Geek News Central I don't know where I would use the transcriptions, because I'll be frank, it's going to require heavy editing. So,
yeah, I'm the same way.
Yeah.
The truth is, when you're even a perfect transcript of every single word that we've said over the last 90 minutes is not going to actually be very useful. It's not very readable.
Right.
Conversation does not translate well to text.
That's true.
What it does do is it gives you a little roadmap of kind of, here's where we talked about Facebook, and here's where we talked about. So you can kind of jump to different points in our conversation. It's obviously there as a means to an end. The transcript exists so that the AI can do what it does.
Yeah.
But even within that, when you're looking at the clips, it'll transcribe the clips. You can highlight certain areas of the text that you want to zoom in on and clip your audio based on the text you've highlighted. So, there are ways in which the text can be useful as a tool to it's like I said, as a means to an end. It's not really ultimately a great way to publish to the consumer. It's just
right.
It doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot on the show. I guess I missed the ability to log into the site to actually get the widgets. So what am I'm sorry, I'm just asking on the show here, where am I missing? Where do I go to actually sign in because I got the transcripts, but I really didn't see any other interaction beyond that.
So to date, we've had a platform called Podcaster Pro.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's where you signed up.
Yeah, that's where I signed up. Yeah.
So we're transitioning from Podcaster Pro, essentially folding that product into the AudioBurst site. So essentially, if you go to search.audioburst.com and search for your podcast, you'll see some clips show up.
Yep.
What we're going to do in the next few months is enable login from that page, where you can then kind of almost like flip the screen and basically go behind the page and say, okay, I'm claiming this content. This is my content. This is, here's where, and do all those kind of metadata changes, add images, do all those kind of, exercise all that, all the different tools that we put into place.
Yep. So and I know we're talking about, AudioBurst, but for those that want to see let me see if I can bring this up. This is the screen that you get for your transcriptions on the current Podcaster Pro platform. The ability to take and embed, download the transcript, and there's some sharing stuff here too.
If you click on that little pencil, if you see the pencil at the
off to the right there,
yeah.
So that pencil gives you the ability to do an edit. And again, this tool set is getting migrated into a much more powerful interface and one that's much more aligned with AudioBurst. You'll see that in the next couple months. But yeah, if you click on the pencil next to one of those clips, you'll see. You'll see there's the waveform, and then you see the. So if you highlight a random bit of that text.
So then that
you see it isolates it up there in the player. So
it isolates it, and then you can, at that point,
then you can change the tags out of the tags, and then if you click burst this, it creates essentially a new burst.
Oh, so I'm just going to grab one here and let's just do that and say burst this. Probably just screwed up your logarithms.
So are you guys gonna do like what we've seen? I think a different company do is enable audio editing via text. If you guys thought about that,
I mean that's essentially what you're doing here. That's the.
Can you delete segments of your content? I guess you're more selecting areas of the content based on
you can select
highlighting the text.
There's an expand button there, so you can if it cut short, let's say, or started a little late, you can expand a little just to get a little more of the clip in there if necessary.
I see that. Yeah.
So, again, this is for people who have the time and the energy and the kind of bandwidth to do this.
So does the bursted clip then create something that can be pushed to a Twitter card, into Facebook, and
yes.
And
that's the idea. That platform becomes a way to look at the content that gets pulled out of the show, and again, this is all stuff that trains the AI. So the more we have podcasters going into the system and making edits, that feedback loop gets created, and it gets a better sense of, okay, well, this is the kind of stuff that is the most interesting to end users.
I gotcha. Because from a podcaster standpoint, a lot of folks, I got in a discussion with someone on a Facebook channel the other day, and they said, this is the only way you share on Facebook now is you have a video with the text rolling in it. And, this is the only way you promote on Facebook audio. And I kind of took umbrage to that a little bit, and we had a little discussion about it. But yeah, again, this is something that the content creator I would see that's super active in promoting their show could use, and it definitely it makes for an interesting interesting promotion tool, at least too. So
yeah, I mean, I would love to see a native audio player in Facebook. Twitter, it plays within the card, so you can
card, yeah.
It plays in the player card, which is great. And we've heard a lot of that feedback too from a lot of folks saying, "Oh, well, social is a visual medium." I think that's the current thinking and the knowledge that's been kind of passed through in terms of what works on social. Now, I think the audio is becoming a much bigger part of people's lives, and as people spend more time on their phone and on the go, you'll start. I think social platforms are going to see a lot more uptick in audio content. I mean, sure, Instagram is a social visual platform, but I think there's a place with other social platforms for audio, and I think that's something where I think the social platforms have been a little slow to get that. But I think there's certainly, I think, an amazing product to be made from social audio and stitching together content that people share, audio content that friends share together.
So when someone shares one of these snippets on social, is there going to be a more automated pathway to be able to enable a connection to the longer form version, or to subscribe, or to make that connection with the content creator's kind of home base of sorts?
Yeah. So that's that's another part of me working with content creators and getting those links in place so that those bursts get tied back to the long form content. That's key for us. Again, is we want to give people the convenience of going through their Twitter feed and being able to listen to audio in place. But then again, from there, saying, okay, this is a great snippet, highlight, link me to the full content. So that's something else we're working on, is linking those bursts back to the original content, and that's where we really need the relationship back with the original publisher or the owner of the content.
Yeah, and I'm super sensitive that anything that at least that, and it's me, that I publish on any platform brings me back to the primary website. And I understand that the providers have to get their licks in too, so, but I think there's a happy medium there that can be met. And anyway, this burst is still working. What is the typical time when you select burst this? I know you could probably go in the queue, right? Based on what's being
it shouldn't be taking that long. So there must be some sort of hiccup there. It should have generated the burst at this point.
Okay.
That might also have something to do with us. Like I said, we're transitioning that entire platform into kind of the AudioBurst platform. So some of the functionality is getting kind of addressed and fixed on the AudioBurst side of things, and not we're not spending a lot of time on Podcaster Pro right now to keep improving it. We really are more looking at migrating the functionality over to AudioBurst.
Right. Hey, Rob, did we talk about exploding trash cans on the show?
I don't think so yet. No, that sounds like an interesting topic.
Yeah, I'm
totally related to what we're talking about.
Yeah, today. I'm looking at one of the translations for a new media show. It's a clip. I think it was when we were talking about because I refer to a trash can as my Mac. I was talking about number of years you get out, and that was discussion. Was talking about the number of years you get out of your gear, and my Mac trash can. So it's fun, and it'll be fun to watch this. And I think if the more if people that really get into this, and they'll be like, that wasn't quite the right context. That'll help you guys too, right? Get the feedback on the right context you're referring to. So if you use some obscure reference point, like I happen to do from time to time, the computer's going to say, "Oh, he's talking about exploding trash cans. Did we have one of those happened in Chicago yesterday.
Yeah, I'm sure Apple is going to be thrilled to have that clip out there. Right?
Right. Instead of calling it the Mac Pro, I call it the trash can. And it is a term I use. It is a term I use, though, so it got the translation right.
If it becomes a trend, then it'll get it.
Yeah,
other people.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, so I think the only thing, from up front, from the whole process, I think the key really for you guys then is, seeing where the distribution happens and, where you can get these clips put into, and, how widespread they're shared. And, I think, be honest with you, just thinking about this, and, Rob and I have seen a lot of stuff come and go in the years. That's going to be key. You guys are going to figure out how to get this to scale so that there's, like you said, five highlights that follow some programming, or recommended following some programming in a way that makes people go, whoa, there's some cool content. If you can get that point nailed, I think that this will go a long, long ways.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of news aggregation apps. There's a lot of there's opportunities. Like I said, with Samsung, who we just announced our partnership with, where on their smart TVs you could get fed interesting audio content matched up to with the let's say the CNN show that you're listening to,
Sure.
or that you're watching, I should say. I think there's a lot of interesting places where audio hasn't found its way into. That certainly, as we become more attached to mobile technologies, or as you were saying, Rob, some other technology that isn't even screen based, but it is in your pocket or on your person. People have switched. People have switched modes where they're spending a lot more time with those headphones in their ears as they're going about their day. Buying groceries, exercising, whatever they do, sitting on a subway, sitting on a train, and all the audio content that's out there is primed to find its way into those earbuds.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any opportunity for audio from video taking a place in the future of this kind of stuff?
Sure. I mean, there's obviously a ton of informational shows that publish that publish as podcasts. You see a lot of TV shows that do that today. I think there's certainly plenty of that. I think the other areas that are interesting to us. I spoke to someone from the UN yesterday. They have people speaking there constantly. They have press conferences. I mean, you have earnings calls from companies. You have lectures. You have TED Talks. There's all sorts of interesting areas that that aren't podcast or radio, where there's interesting audio content that's getting created. But I think as long as the audio can stand on its own without the visuals, again, then the AI doesn't care. It can figure out what you're talking about regardless. And in terms of the accuracy, the cleaner the audio is, the more accuracy the transcription will be, and then as a result, the better the clipping and tagging will be. So, if it's good video that doesn't have a lot of background noise, that the audio is clear and easy to decipher, then absolutely we can index that too.
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I wanted to ask just one last thing on this topic. There's a lot of audio that is out there that maybe isn't that conducive to this kind of process, like storytelling podcasts. I think is one. Content that's behind paywalls. Is there something that you see there that fits with this model?
Well, I mean, content behind paywalls, I can't do much with, unless those people enforce.
Well, yeah, but you're offering sampling, right? Yeah. So
sure. Yeah. If I think the interesting thing is when you talk about scripted podcasts, narrative podcasts, or even some things that live somewhere in the middle, right? Like S-Town is nonfiction, but it's drawing on a lot of narrative elements to put a form around that story. Same when you look at there's a lot of, obviously the AI does a very good job when it's dealing with very kind of fact-driven informational content, but we're looking at a number of different potential segmentation strategies so that the AI could say, okay, well, I recognize that this is a fictional podcast, this is a scripted work that's audio, and it might devise a different, if we can feed enough of that content into the system and again have it spit out a number of results and have people say, oh, that was interesting, that was actually a interesting way of clipping out 90 seconds from a scripted podcast, it will devise a rule set around that, and it'll come up with an algorithm for which to start clipping and tagging that content. There's right now we have essentially two different strategies in terms of how it clips content, but that could expand to 5 or 6 or 10 depending on different situations. We're working on an interview segmentation version of our segmenting that listens to voices, right? So it's saying, okay, here's the questioner, here's an answer. We should try. Its strategy should be to try to get.
We're getting some feedback. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's like a scrubbing sound or something. I don't. If someone's.
Is that me? It might be my sweater on.
Oh,
yeah, I think it was his microphone.
Shoot, I should have said something a little while ago. Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, the AI, we can feed in different types of content and see how it does and what sort of solutions it comes up with, and essentially say, okay, well, different rules apply to this kind of content versus that content. But that's I think kind of down the road, further down the roadmap in terms of where the AI will be going. But I think ultimately the promise of AI, right, is that it develops its own rule set and its own neural network of how to treat different types of content. So, by that logic, it's kind of just a matter of how much content you feed it and how much feedback you give it in terms of what it does with it. And ultimately, it will come up with a solution and figure out that that the best way to clip out one kind of podcast might be a certain strategy that's different from another kind.
All right. Hey, we had a question if it's integrated with Embedly. There's a platform that's weird.
No, but okay. Again, this is the sort of thing. This is exactly kind of what my role at AudioBurst is to talk to content creators and say, okay, well, if enough people are interested in integrating with Embedly, then let's do it. That's a big part of what I was brought on to do, and I will say, I think, from my conversations with the CEO of AudioBurst and everyone else who works at AudioBurst, I think there's a lot of attention paid on how can we make this. How does this benefit the publisher and the content creator? How are we building something that makes this that makes their lives easier, makes their content more discoverable, makes it more monetizable? So that's the company is very focused on making podcasts work. Podcasts and audio content in general work better for its creators.
One thing we are up against time here, Rob, just so you know. We're already at 90 minutes. Before we kick off here, I just want to remind everyone that Rob, just so you know, I travel. There will be no show next Saturday. I'm on my way to Vegas during the show.
I am too.
Okay,
I am too. Yeah.
So no show next Saturday because of the NAB.
I should say AudioBurst will also be there, so come find us at NAB if you're there.
Are you up in the podcast pavilion, or what area are you in?
I'm not sure. I won't be there.
Okay.
My West Coast counterpart will be there.
Okay, cool. So so
certainly, if you
go ahead,
email us at info@audioburst, and we'll hook up if you're interested.
Awesome. Rob and I both will be at the Podcast Pavilion in South Upper Hall. So if you're going to be in Vegas, stop by and say hello to both of us, and we're going to need all the love we can get because we're kind of where they've got a stash. So So, stop by and see us. Rob, any by the ways before we get out of here?
Not so much, but to kind of follow up with what you were saying about the NAB, I think we're in the early stages of working with those folks, and we definitely want to see it succeed. And because I think as you look to the future, I think that community is pretty important to the growth and development of the podcasting space. So, Todd and I and Rob Walsh and the folks from Podbean are going to be down there, and we're going to be evangelizing podcasting to the broadcasting community. And so this has been kind of a multi-year project for all of us. And I know that the NAB wants that event to be something that podcasters think of as an important event to the podcasting community, outside of just radio people going to this event. And so we've been working hard to get this thing, this relationship with the podcast community and the National Association of Broadcasters kind of rock solid and moving in a positive direction. So we're going to be working hard down there in Vegas, starting a week from now. So I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot of what's been going on down there, in subsequent weeks. So.
Yeah, and one thing too is this show, we all the companies have basically made a significant financial investment. It's probably a $20,000 or $25,000 show to do, and by the time you get done with airfare, food, hotels, booth costs, shipping, everything, it's a significant chunk for every company that goes to this event. And we're really going there to, this time, we definitely want to generate business out there to pay for the show. But most of us are going there to wave the flag to help the podcasting space. So we'll see how that goes and how we're received. I think that the future of NAB and podcasting, we'll see how this show turns out. I think there's a lot riding on it for NAB and for the providers that are going to the event. So, just kind of give it a little inside baseball look there at what it's going on. I know we worked really, really hard over the past month to get the press engaged and also get radio companies, radio stations, GMs, the church leaders, everyone that's involved in the broadcast space, whatever genre they're in, to be aware that, hey, if you're not doing podcasting already, this is what you need to think about. And I hope everyone has gotten a chance. If you get a chance, go over to powerpresspodcast.com and read the 3 NAB pieces that are put out. I think if nothing else, they'll give you something to think about from a content standpoint, because it's purely what we're trying to do was to get the broadcasters just to say, do I need to look at this? And if I'm not looking at this, I'm going to be impacted. I think we all know as podcasters that radio has no choice. There's a study that just came out of the BBC that said that they are losing their 16 to 24 age group. The 16 to 24 age group, at least in the UK, by the numbers, are listening to more digital content than they are all of the BBC content combined on a weekly basis. So the BBC is seeing the trend, and the BBC's been way ahead of podcasting for years. So radio's got some years left in it, but it's a ticking time bomb, and we hope that the broadcasters at the event and creators will come by and see us and see what they can do to get their shows going. Rob, anything to add?
Yeah, and we're not standing still. I'm doing 3 panels at the event on the live stream. Actually, I got Todd and Rob on the. Yeah,
I'm on 2 of those.
The NAB live.
I'm on 3 too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's called the NAB Show live stream. It's going to be an hour long, almost like a panel session talking about the podcasting industry. That's going to be live streamed off of the homepage of the nabshow.com. So we're down there evangelizing, and we're pushing hard down there to try and grow this medium. Now, broadcasters are, they're kind of, they're embracing it, but they're also not really all on board. So we're still kind of in the formative stages, and honestly, the podcast medium is is still, a fairly new medium. So, these timeframes for starting a new medium like podcasting are multi-decade kind of transitions. And I think we're still faced with at least another decade of transition. But I would say that the next decade is going to be a little perilous for radio unless they move aggressively quickly.
It's going to happen much fast. Yeah, they got 20 years left, but it's going to go like this.
I think two things. So, podcasting is clearly from a user standpoint and just an entertainment value standpoint has given audio a real shot in the arm, right? So you had radio that really kind of settled into some very specific formats that podcasting gave people the opportunity to step in and say, okay, well, we're going to try something different that, radio wasn't really predisposed to experimenting with, right? So in that sense, podcasting has given the audio industry a real shot in the arm and brought a lot of renewed interest to something that was seen as kind of real, radio is a real old time kind of media. And then the other thing I'd say is, what we talked about before is 50% of radio listening happens in the car. And, the whole environment of the car and even the home with Alexa type Amazon audio devices and other Google Home devices, it's less than 10 years. I think, 3 to 5 years, the entire environment's going to change and your car radio is not going to be the same, and your home listening, as people swap out their stereos for, virtual assistant enabled speakers, none of that's going to, the entire supply chain, that whole process of discovery and listening to content is going to completely get disrupted. So, and people will naturally go to the kinds of content that they find engaging. And I think the podcast world is doing really interesting boundary pushing types of, content that radio hasn't had the incentive to do.
Dan, Ford said that they'll have every car that they sell, all the way from down the lowest economy vehicle to the top, the highest end vehicle, will have mobile embedded in it in 2020. Every vehicle will have. It's truly the battle for, the battle for the HDMI 1 plug on our TVs has been won, and cable is seeing huge declines as people cut the cord and people plug into Roku's or other types of devices. So the battle in the car is, most of us today, when we get in our vehicles, the thing in default loads is that FM radio. That in 2020, at least on the Ford side, will absolutely not be the case. It'll be the dashboard interface with Pandora, with Spotify, with podcast, and there'll be a selection for radio
and AudioBurst.
There will be a selection for radio, but it's not going to be on by default. And that tick tock. Yeah.
And those dashboards are going to make a direct connection to the internet too.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
That's the other part of this that, I know many in the podcasting space have said, well, the car is just a smart speaker or just a Bluetooth speaker. And I think that's not the model of the future. That's just a transitionary step. These cars are going to be connected to the internet at all times.
And if Ford was smart, they would just bake the lifetime cost of that internet connection into the cost of the vehicle.
And I think
obviously
to some degree they are.
Or offset that cost with what they realize is, a big, what they've never participated in is when you turn that radio on and listen to an ad, they've never gotten a dime of any of the advertising that they're enabling. It's happening in their vehicle. Yeah. It's happening through their car radio. And I think they see all of this as an opportunity to say, okay, well, if we reconfigure the way the radio works, can we now insert ourselves into the advertising chain here and participate in that whole monetization process? And that's the biggest motivator all for them.
That's a big 10-hour discussion right there. So anyway, Dan, how can they reach you?
I am at dan@audioburst.com. I'm also on Twitter at Dan Sacher, Sacher. And ping me, email me. I'm I'd love to hear from content creators and answer questions. And as I said, keep improving what AudioBurst does to make it a better tool for podcasters and content creators.
Rob?
It can be found rob at voxnest.com or rob at spreaker.com. On Twitter as well, at Rob Greenlee with 2 E's. Definitely, I post a lot about podcasting over there.
And of course, Todd at blueberry.com or at Geek News on Twitter. And again, stop see us at NAB Show. It's been a pleasure to be with you this day or whatever you're listening to the show on demand, maybe evening or morning. But everyone, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time on the New Media Show. Everyone, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, guys.
Bye. Bye.